Hey there. In this session, we're going to be editing together a podcast. I'm Dan Lefebvre, the host of Based on a True Story, the podcast that compares your favorite Hollywood movies with history. And today, we're going to be editing together an episode that we recorded about the movie Hidalgo. Now, if you've seen any of the recording or editing sessions for Based on a True Story before, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can actually listen to the final episode once it is done. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind if this is your first time. First, I record a couple of months ahead of time, and then I edit separately from the time that I record. So there's another video that is recording this episode, and then there's this where we're actually editing it together, but the final episode won't go live for a couple months as of this editing session here. So make sure to either subscribe here on YouTube in order to get it, or in your favorite podcast app of choice. Now, the last thing I want to point out is that I'm not going to be paying a lot of attention to the video because I'm going to be focusing a lot on the actual editing program here. So let's go ahead and pull that up. And here you can see my screen. And let's just dive right into editing this, and I'll try to explain things as I go along. So as I mentioned before, this was recorded previously. So the first thing I like to do is to come in and actually add effects. So I have some effects chain, an effects chain that I've created for my podcast. And this is something that I took quite a bit of time to play around with what I like my voice to sound like for an audio-only medium. So this is a little bit different here on YouTube because you can actually see what's going on as well. But when you have only audio, and when you're focusing on just audio, a lot of times you're going to be listening with headphones. You want the audio quality to be just a little bit better. Not saying that you want it to be bad quality for YouTube or for video, but when it's only audio, that's all you can focus on. So you want to make sure it's extra good. So I have this effects chain here, and it's essentially a mixture of some isotope essentials that I've added in. And then I also have an effects chain on the overall. So basically the difference here with, that's a compressor if you noticed, by the way. That's a quick compressor. So the difference here is that this effects chain is only applied to this one track, and this compressor is applied to all of my tracks. Now, I only have one track right now, but we will be adding more tracks as we start editing. So the first step of my editing process is to just cut together the actual podcast itself and make sure that I edit out any mistakes. So I'm just going to come in here, and I know that this is all one take here because it ends and then there's a break. If you watch the recording session, then I kind of explained how I record there, so that I know that when I go back in and edit it, then I'll see that that's a break between the introduction, and then this is a little segment that I do called Two Truths and a Lie. And it looks like I made a mistake here. So what I'm listening for when I listen for these in these edit points, I can see this is an edit point because it's actually a separate recording, a separate file. So I'm listening for the same thing. So when I make a mistake in recording, I'll go back a sentence or two, or a thought or a phrase, and re-record that part to get a better take. And then this part of the editing process is just going through that. So,
but for today,
there we go. But for today is what I'm listening for.
/support. Once again, that's based on a true story podcast.com/support. But for today.
So you can see what I did there. I said it really fast, but for today. So I recognized it in the recording, and then I did a new take, and so I just need to cut off this part right here. Now, I'm not going to explain that for every single edit point. Let me fix this here.
/support. But for today,
I want to give myself a little bit of time just so it's kind of a natural conversational tone.
/support. But for today,
there we go. So I'm not going to explain that process for every single edit point because if I zoom out here, there's a few different edit points. right? This is actually not too bad. I actually got on a roll there and did pretty well for quite a bit of the episode. Usually there's a lot more edit points if you've seen any of the other editing sessions. But we need to come in here and let's find this here.
For a bit of comparison,
right there. So cut this in. And move this over, and then I'm just looking for timing, kind of a natural break in sentence in the conversation.
The site has 18 men listed receiving the award. For a bit of...
So, I don't know if you heard that. If you listen real closely.
Award.
You can hear I'm taking a breath. So after I said that, I took a breath. I don't take out all breaths because I find that actually starts to sound a little unnatural.
Receiving the award.
But when I notice it in an edit point, I will take it out, especially if it's cut in between, like halfway in the breath. That's the worst, is because that's an obvious mistake. It needs to be edited if that's the case. If you hear like a breath halfway through and then it cuts off.
Award. For a bit of compare. Award. For a bit of...
But I've seen like a lot of people posting in various, podcasting groups and stuff. And a lot of times people try to take out, especially starting out, they try to take out every single breath. One, it's really time consuming. Two, I've found in my experience, it's not really worth it because most people are forgiving and they know that you're a human and you have to take a breath. And so if you take breaths every so often, it's just part of talking. It's just part of the way it is. It's when you start to have things that are very obvious mistakes, either really, really loud breaths or breathing into the microphone too much. But that's different than just a breath every now and then. Frank, of course, not of course, Frank. That was a note to myself when I was recording. Let me see if I can remember what that is.
Frank, of course, decides to take Hidalgo. Of course.
So, all right, I remember now. As I was recording, what I did was I said, here I say, of course.
Of course.
But I should have said, Frank, of course.
Frank, of course, decides to take.
So, this is basically an edit point here. But because it's a different word, that's why I left that to myself. So I can delete that marker. Come in here.
Of Syria to Damascus. Frank, of Syria to Damascus. Frank.
There we go. So that's an edit there. This is no edit continue, which means that there's no edit point here. So this end here.
But not real. And since that gives you an idea of...
I can just continue on.
But not real. But not real. And since that gives...
There we go. So that's a good timing there. And we have a couple more. This is a fairly short episode.
And that's certainly possible. That's certainly possible. There, prove it.
There we go. So select this here. I'm going to do it a different way. I hit Control-T in Mixcraft, and that will cut it. So you can see what that did there. It cut it, so I can just delete it rather than resizing the end. Same result, different method.
To prove it. And that's certainly possible. There are to prove it. And that's
there we go. I'm good with that timing. You'll notice like I kind of just throw it in there and then I'm like, oh, that's good. I'll listen to it, but I've been doing this. This is what episode 118. So I've been doing this for a little while, and all of them are my own voice and in very similar style, and so I get familiar with kind of what a good pacing is for my own voice. That's just something that comes with time.
You see, Frank's claim.
So if you're just starting off and you're doing a podcast or you're editing audio or something, if you're familiar with the voice, you'll get more familiar with it, but just give yourself some time there.
You see, Frank's claims to be more specific to England, 3 in Germany. You see, Frank's...
There we go. So that part right there. You see Frank's claims?
You see, Frank's claims you have been a part of. You see, Frank...
There we go. And this is the end of the episode. So this is the outro here. It looks like I did all that in one take. So this is a very, very fast. Normally, editing takes twice as long as the episode, not the other way around. We're only, 10 minutes or so into this, and we've already got roughly what will probably be between a 15 to 20-minute episode done. Now, if you've seen the movie Hidalgo, or if you know anything about that, you'll start to see why it's a shorter episode. Basically, not a lot of it is real. All right, so we have this. My next step is I'm going to come in and I'm going to create a new audio track, and this is going to be my music. So I want to lay down my music, and I'm going to save this file. This is just instancing, so this is version 3. And let's find some music for this. So I have a browser window open. I use Audio Blocks, a great service. I love this service. It allows me to find music for a good it's a subscription service, so you have to pay for it. It's not free, but I like being able to have the subscription, so I can just grab whatever I want off of this without having to worry about, oh, this track is $2, this track is $1, this track is $5, and pricing and all that. I can just know that it's all good. So let's see. Hidalgo is horseback riding. It's an Arabian race, supposedly. It's kind of Western. Let's look for maybe some country music. Excuse me. It's in my throat. It's one thing about talking all the time. It starts to get kind of dry mouth. Let's listen to some of these. A little too much. Let's actually do this. I'm going to go to music. Let's make this a little bit bigger so it's a little bit easier to see here. I'm going to go to music, go to the genres, and let's do it this way. That way we can it doesn't actually have to have the word country or the tag country. It's categorized that way. And I want to let's do the most recent, see what's new in here.
Been broken, beaten down.
Okay. I don't want actual singing, because I'm going to be talking over it. You know, I kind of like that. So I think that'll be a good for the intro. Let's open this folder. Oh, it opened up off screen. So let's pull this over. So this is the file here. Let me, oops. I just made the entire desktop disappear for a little bit. That's fine. So I just want to create a new window here. So Hidalgo, this will be my stock audio for this, and let's dump this in here, and then hop back to Mixcraft, and see if I can open up this without making my entire desktop disappear. There we go. What was happening was I was hovering over. I had the Windows Explorer in the taskbar, and so it was hovering over that because I had two windows, and so it was showing the desktop. That's just something the Windows does. All right, so let's do this. Play it in this. All right, right there where it does that change, that's where I'm going to come in and start talking. I try to find natural points like that in the music.
Joe Johnston has
just like that, except I need to bring this down. So right here, bring it down here, and then let's set this to quite a bit down lower.
Joe Johnston has directed some great...
Okay, I like that. And now I need to fade this all the way out, and it's not going to be over the entire way, it's just the intro.
Great movies, including the recent holiday-themed film, The Nutcracker and the Four Realms, that just came out. But he's got...
Okay, quick bit on that. If you watch the recording session, you'll know Nutcracker and the Four Realms did not just come out, but that's because, again, like I said before, I record a couple months ahead of time. So when this episode is coming out, when the Hidalgo episode is coming out, it will have just come out. And that... If you're looking to start a podcast or that aspect, if you are scheduling things out, those are little things that you can do. You can add into your video or your podcast or whatever you're doing in order to make it seem like, it's a little more timely, right? And in this case, I can tell that there's a movie coming out, Joe Johnston being the guy that directed Hidalgo, and so that's the tie-in there in the introduction, just to talk a little bit about the movie, and I always do that in the introduction, just talk a little bit about the movie itself before talking about the timeline of the movie and what's inside the movie, which is the bulk of the episode. And so that's just a nice way of being able to make it seem a little more timely with when people are going to be listening to it. To mention a movie that just came out, which is easy to tell when you look at movies that are supposed to be coming out at certain dates.
To be learning about...
So this, I'm adding in, wasn't really talking about what I was doing. I'm adding in the ending here. Not the ending, the bumper between the introduction and Two Truths and a Lie.
That, as of this recording, is the only film he's directed that's rooted in history. I'm Dan Lefebvre, and this is based on a true story. Before starting our story today, let's set up our game.
There we go. And that's as simple as it is, right? All right, so let's hop back into here because I need a track to go right here that is a bumper between Two Truths and a Lie and the bulk of the episode. So let's find another nice country, maybe something kind of race, like because the point of it is, racing horses. Let's do a search, actually, for race. See what there is. Maybe let's see. Those are all pretty much the same. Maybe a little too much there. Let's do our mood as happy and upbeat. Oops, I don't want race in there anymore. I just want... That might work. Let's try that. So it's kind of like, road song. So it's kind of like, traveling and that race aspect of, being, I didn't want it too fast paced, like too fast of a race, but, it's a horse race. Let's go to our downloads here. Copy this over. I could work out of downloads. I like to move everything over. That way, everything for this episode is under a single folder. And that way I can move it if I need to, with a couple exceptions. Like a shared asset, I have, the kind of the common song that goes at the end. I don't copy that every time, but we'll come to that. I'll tell you about it when we get to it.
After his horse, Hidalgo.
Okay, so I don't really want this whole instrument, the whole entire band coming in, so I'm going to have to fade it out before then. Let's see what that sounds like when I do that.
learn about Frank T. Hopkins and the movie named after his horse, Hidalgo. Our movie today begins with...
Okay, so I'm going to come in a little bit sooner here. Have this come down a little bit more. Even more so when the band kicks in.
Our movie today begins with some chilly scenery. We see trees, sun, and snow-covered fields. Then there's shots of cold, brisk water covered by ice. When we hear a whistle, we see the head of a beautiful brown and white Mustang. We see trees, sun, and snow-covered fields. Then there's shots of cold, brisk water.
There we go. So it just kind of fades out. I don't want to get into the, the point of the music is not to really listen to the music. It's just a bumper. It's just kind of a nice little segue. So I need one thing for the end here. And let's try this road song again. And let's see how it sounds at the end. Nah. All right. I don't like that. So let's find a new one. Maybe that one. Let's try that. Let's try that and see how that goes. Come back to my downloads. There we go. And let's move this over. And this is going to fade in and then just kind of play at the end as, again, a bumper between the episode and the ending.
T. Hopkins sitting in the saddle of a horse.
I want it down quite a bit until the end, and then it'll come up.
Hopkins sitting in the saddle of a horse.
That goes on a little long. Let's move this. That is one thing I wish in Mixcraft. Maybe there is a way. If you know a way in Mixcraft, let me know. I've looked and I haven't been able to find anything to be able to select. I'd like to select both of these keyframes essentially and move them. I have to move them individually.
Hopkins sitting in the saddle of a horse. This episode of Based on a...
There we go. And this is the part here that I was talking about where I have a single source for these because I use this at the end of every episode. So -25, again, always the same formula at the end. That way every episode ends the same. Come in, copy this, and we'll see what we do here in a second. Time this.
Me, Dan Lefebvre. If you want to learn more, produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. If you want to learn more...
There we go. In that break, it's kind of that timing there. And then this guy here is going to end it.
Thanks so much for listening, and I'll chat with you again really soon.
Go fade up. Almost 20 minutes. Almost 20 minutes. Oh well. I'm not going to add fluff just for the sake of adding fluff to get it to 20 minutes. That's fine. I try to keep episodes usually, anywhere from... Originally it was half an hour and then started to get to like 45 minutes. Some of them were over an hour. Some require more than others. Some, like Hidalgo, just don't require as much. All right, so here's what I do here is I kind of hide where this cross fade happens in this audio here. So the timing on the intro needs to be in this break, and that way it kind of comes in at that consistent point. And then the ending needs to be here. And so I have the two, and then it just repeats until then. So let's listen to this, see if you can hear this crossfade right here.
If you've already listened to the 100 or so of the past episodes of Based on a True Story and are looking for something new.
Did you hear it? Let me solo this, see if you heard it. Pretty good, right? It's not too bad. A little bit of a fade. You can hear it if you're listening for it. Now that you know it's there, you'll be listening for it. But if you're not listening for it, it's not really there. It's
to the 100 or so of the past episodes of Based.
Not really going to notice it. All right, so this was fast. You know, usually, again, the episodes will take about twice the amount of time at least in order to edit them. And we got roughly a 20-minute episode knocked out in a little over 20 minutes, which is not bad. So the final step of this, I'm going to mix this down. Let's come into the folder here. Oops. And this is going to be 118 version 3. So you can see up here, it's version 3. And this way, so I run this through a QA process where I send it to a few family members and good friends who have volunteered to listen to each episode before it goes out to see if I make any mistakes. And then I listen to it myself as well. And just to see if there is anything. And so this way, if somebody comes back and says, hey, you know, I noticed an issue with that, with the Hidalgo episode at, 10 minutes in, you repeated a phrase or something, then I know what version they're talking about because I tell them, I'll be like, I'll send them this file and they'll say, oh, in 118 version 3 at 10 minutes, there's an editing error. And so I can come in and see exactly what version number it is, because when I make that change, then that'll become version 4. And then if what happens, and the big reason for this is, if I'm listening to something and I notice a mistake, I'm going to create version 4. But then one of my friends or my good friends that's doing the QA is going to come back and notice something, and they'll say, hey, I noticed an error in version 3. And I'll be like, oh, okay, well, I already did that. I already fixed that because I noticed it too, and now we're at version 4. But if they notice a mistake in version 4, then I know that I still need to go back and do that. And even if it's the same version, I'll go back and check just to double check and make sure that I actually did fix it. Sorry, I should have had this exporting as we're talking, because you can see down here it's actually exporting the file. So the last step of this process is to open up Audition, and let's see if it's going to open or if I'm going to need to sign into Creative Cloud. But what I do is I run it through essentially leveling it in Audition, because that has a pretty nice match loudness feature that I can do. And it doesn't look like Audition is going to open. But this is not done either, and it's using up a lot of system power in order to do that. Actually, the system itself is CPU. You can see Mixcraft is not using very much at all. Really, what's taking up a lot of my system power is that I'm recording this video at the same time, and I'm doing that on the computer as well. So that's what's eating up all my system power, which is probably why Audition is not starting up right away. But that's okay. I'll wait for this to finish. Actually, you know what? I'll go ahead and pause the video here, and then I'll come back when this is done, and then we'll launch. You can see, there we go. I'm going to need to sign into this anyway. So I'll pause this, sign in, and we'll come back with Audition and do this last step. All right, so this is wrapping up. This is almost done. I have Audition launching as well. So, yep, there's Audition launching. Mixcraft is just about to wrap up. While that happens, let's hop over to our folder where we exported this. So this is the folder here. And what we want to do is we want to come into Audition, and we're going to take this file to export out of Mixcraft. I'm going to bring it into Audition. And then I'm going to come into Match Loudness. If you don't have this open, if you want to follow along and kind of do this, come into Window, go to Match Loudness. Now, there are a few different settings that you can do. I use this one and then set it to -16 because I've done some research and all the that I could find, all of the podcasting standards and stuff are kind of at a -16 LUFS for that, which is the loudness here. So if we open up this waveform, you can see what this looks like, what this waveform looks like. But watch what happens when I actually run this. There's two things that are going to happen. One, it's going to bring up these quieter areas, like this part right here that's kind of quiet. It's going to make that louder and match that loudness with some of these louder parts. And the result is a much more smooth and consistent loudness throughout. And so, you're not, you have those times where you listen to something and then you're listening and it's all quiet. So you turn up the volume and then it gets really loud all of a sudden and you have to turn it down. This is to avoid that kind of thing, both within this episode itself, but the benefit of using an industry standard of -16, I think Spotify actually wants -14, but that's a little bit loud. But the benefit of using an industry standard or something close to that is that, when you're listening to Based on a True Story and then it moves to the next podcast, if they're following that same standard, which hopefully most podcasters are or trying to, then there's not going to be that having to adjust that volume level too much between those episodes either. So two big benefits there. So when I run this, watch this waveform to see how it's going to be different. It's going to be a max peak level of -3, which means it's going to cut off right around here and here. It's not going to allow it to get any louder than that, but it's going to make it more consistent across. So we can let Audition do its thing and run through that there. Six seconds remaining. There we go, and we are almost done. You can see how the waveform has changed. It's really brought a lot of that up. There we go. So you can see, obviously, there's still quieter parts. There's still louder parts. It's not like it forces everything. It's not going to force it all there, but it helps even it out. So you can see the difference there. And then the last step of this is to just come in and save this out. I save it as 64K. This will give us a nice small file, so it's 9 megs, which is nice for people because most people will listen to a podcast on their phone. They don't want to download a lot of data. And so anything below 64 with a mono file is probably going to start to introduce some actual issues with the quality of the audio itself. But 64 should be pretty good. 96 is, you could go to 96 if you wanted to. 128, 320, it's 256. That's overkill for mono for just voice. That's just using up unnecessary space on the other end. When people download it on their phones, it's using up unnecessary space on their phone. So the smaller you can get it, be a little bit more considerate for people that are actually downloading it. And the only other thing I'd point out here is that it's constant bit rate. Variable bit rates, VBR will actually, I like variable bit rate. I think it gets a better quality file when it comes to things like music in particular, because it will actually read the louder parts and the quieter parts, and it will give more compression where it's quieter. Like if it's complete silence, it can compress a lot of that out because it's just complete silence. You're not going to notice if it's really compressed because there's no noise there. But if there's a lot of signal in the waveform, then it's not going to compress it as much because there's a lot, you're going to notice that a lot more. You're going to hear that compression a lot more. That's variable bit rate. And so with music in particular that has a lot of those loud and quiet parts, you get a lot of really good results. With constant bit rate, it keeps it consistent throughout. So it's going to be 64K throughout the entire thing. Whereas if I did, 64K variable bit rate, maybe right here where it's really quiet, maybe it's only 32 right there, but you're not going to know the difference because it's really quiet there, and so it can get away with compressing it there. So that's kind of the difference. The key thing when you're getting into podcasts in particular, you always want to do constant bitrate. The reason for that is because so many podcasting apps will try to read the length, and it actually will download in segments. So it doesn't download the entire file. It downloads it in little tiny segments. That's how you can actually stream a file without downloading it. And so when the technology on the podcast app or the host side too that tries to deliver that file, when it's variable, it bases it on the size and the actual what it sees. So right here, it might think that, oh man, this is really compressed. This is really really small, which means if I know that this file is 9 megs. And right here, man, this must be a really long file in order to stay at this this bit rate right here, that it is right here, all the way through the rest of the file. But then all of a sudden, it gets more of the file. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. It just jumped all the way up here to 64. Well, okay, in order for it to be 9 megs across 64K, then oh man, this file must be a lot shorter. So then the duration that it's guessing is going to be a lot shorter. And so that's where you're going to start to get into issues with things like when you play and pause. If you pause it and then try to play it back, it might jump around. It might not play in the right spot. It might think that this file that's only, a little less than 20 minutes, it might think it's like half an hour or even an hour long. Or it might think it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on how it's playing. So anyway, long story short, I don't want to get too much into the technical side of that there, but basic, all you need to know is do constant bitrate for podcasts. That's all that is. Okay, so let's save this out. It's this little warning. It's going to be saved to a lossy format. It's compressed. That's fine because I have the WAV file. I have it uncompressed in Mixcraft that I can save out if I need to. This is going to be the final MP3 file. And there we go. So we have, if we look over here in our folder, we have our MP3 file, and this is the actual file that I'm going to check for QA. I'll listen to it myself. I send it out to some good friends and family and have them check it at some point. That's another reason why I like to record ahead of time. It gives everybody kind of a chance to listen to it, see if they have any feedback. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It happens. Sometimes people don't get a chance to listen to it, but I always make sure to listen to it at the very least to make sure that, if there's any obvious glaring issues that I can go back and fix those. So all right, so that wraps up this editing session for our episode on the movie Hidalgo. I really hope that you enjoyed hanging out with me for the past, look at the timer, 39 minutes or so. If you learned something new, hit the like button. If you have any more history to share about the movie Hidalgo, by all means, feel free to add it into the comments. One thing I like to point out in every single episode, if you've listened to the podcast, is I like to point out some sort of a movie or sorry, not a movie, a book or multiple books or some sort of a resource that you could dig into it and start learning more because when it comes down to it, there's people that spend months and years researching a lot of these topics, and I just can't do that for a podcast, that I'm releasing one every other week, and, have all of, life's commitments and job and all that kind of stuff outside of it. So there's no way I can dedicate, I'm not doing this full time. I can't dedicate all that time to it. So I try to whet your appetite, give you enough information that you want to start digging into it more and want to start learning more about that topic, and hopefully shine some light on some of the authors and researchers who have done a lot of research into these topics and get you into reading some of their books. So definitely dig in more to some of the resources for Hidalgo. If you have any other resources yourself for the movie Hidalgo, I might have already read them or might have already researched them for this episode, but feel free to share them in the comments for this video. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to actually listen to the final episode once that is done. That will go out a couple months from now. So you'll get to listen to that either by hitting subscribe on YouTube or by subscribing to Based on a True Story in your favorite podcast app of choice. And that wraps it up. Thanks for watching.